Mascot racers has been a big thing for a few decades now, as there's nothing more fun than just a fun, simple multiplayer racing game, which is why stuff like Mario Kart is still big after all these years. I mean, we've already talked about the sales about Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and so because of the huge success of the Mario Kart franchise, a lot of Mario Kart clones comes out over the years. And I know people use the term clone as a negative light, but despite that, I do feel like there are some really good non-Mario Kart car racers out there. Like Diddy Kong Racing is a jam, and especially Crash Team Racing. But out of all the series out there, there is no other franchise that has more racing games right next to Mario Kart than probably Sonic the Hedgehog. Because over the years, Sega has released multiple Sonic racing games, whether it's actually Mario Kart-like or whether it's trying to do its own thing. And while some of them were very fun, I enjoyed Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transform and Team Sonic Racing, even though that was kind of forgettable, it was still a pretty solid time. And of course, I cannot get enough about Sonic Riders, unironically one of my favorite racing games of all time period. But yeah, there has been plenty of Sonic racing games over the years, and honestly, out of all the kind of spin-offs you can do of Sonic, I feel like racing makes the most sense because Sonic's whole shtick is gotta go fast. But there is one Sonic racing game that still gets talked about somewhat to this very day. And that game is none other than freaking Sonic R. This is one of the weirdest Sonic games that has ever been released. As when it came out, it was around the time when the Sonic series was in this weird spin-off limbo, as Sega and Sonic Team were struggling to figure out a way to how to make a first ever 3D Sonic game. And while they couldn't really do it on the Sega Saturn and had to wait until the Sega Dreamcast, Sega needed to put something on the Saturn that is Sonic related, and so because of this, Sega released a lot of much more smaller scale Sonic games like Sonic Jam, which is a compilation of all the Genesis games, or Sonic 3D Blast, which is an enhanced port of the Genesis game. Which were all pretty solid titles, but there wasn't really a original game release on the Sega Saturn until Sega hired a small studio called Traveler's Tales to work on a Sonic game. Traveler's Tales. Now this company has so many games under its belt over the years. You'll probably mostly recognize them as being the main developers on some of the bigger LEGO games. But before Warner Brothers put them in the LEGO mines for a few decades, they also helped with a lot of other franchises, as they made a couple of kick-ass Disney games like Mickey Mania and Toy Story 2. Hell, they even worked on the Crash Bandicoot series with Wrath of Cortex and Twinsanity. Pretty solid developers Sega choose for this game. However, despite that, when it finally released in 1997, it received fairly mixed reviews by critics alike. Even to this very day, this game is a much more of a love it or hate it title, as some fans like this game while some really hate it, and for me, I'm kinda in the middle. There's stuff I do like about this game, while there's others I'm not really big on. I also kinda struggled a bit trying to figure out how to play this game. I did play a little bit on the Dolphin until I eventually found a pretty decent PC port. And thanks to the mod work by Sonic fans, I was able to get some visual effects that were only exclusive to the Sega Saturn and was kinda butchered with the original PC port. Plus, it's in widescreen too, so it's a lot more convenient. Although I should say is that even though that I did add a bit of mods to this game, it's only graphical mods to make it more like the Sega Saturn. There's no gameplay tweaks or anything, so even then, I played this game twice on the GameCube and PC, so I have a pretty good idea on the original experience on Sonic on his only Sega Saturn game. But with everything out of the way, let's get started. Alrighty, so you start the game, you're greeted to the title screen, and once you do some menuing work, you're greeted to the character roster. When you start the game, you only have 4 characters available, but as soon as you play through the game, you can unlock about 5 more characters. As the starting roster is the most basic kind of Sonic characters you can think of, so Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy. And after you choose your character, you can choose the various courses in this game. Although don't expect a lot, because unlike something like Super Mario Kart or Mario Kart 64 where 16 to 20 courses, Sonic R only has 5 courses in this game. Although I will give them the benefit of the doubt because unlike Super Mario Kart or Mario Kart 64, a lot of the courses in this game is way bigger and more expansive compared to those, although that could be either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your taste. As for the gameplay, Sonic R is probably one of the most unique mascot racing games I've played because unlike other racing games where you're traveling in a vehicle or something, here you're running on foot. As this game is more like a platformer racing game than just a simple racing game. As for several of these courses, it relies much more on platforming challenges more than anything. You could just do the race and win, but you're not going to be having that much of a fulfilling game. As Sonic R really wants you to explore these courses throughout, as there are so many different branching paths within the race course, and throughout each and every one of them there are various collectibles you can find. Of course, since this is a Sonic game, there are rings everywhere that you can collect, as they hold two different purposes throughout the course. For one, you can use it for these special dash panels. With the more rings you have, the further you can go. And secondly, and most importantly, there are these special gates where you need to have a certain amount of rings to access. And with these areas, they hold different things like shortcuts and more importantly, various collectibles, which can be either the various Chaos Emeralds or golden tokens that you need to use to unlock more characters. And this is where I feel like the big challenge of Sonic R comes from, is trying to collect everything you can. And once you collect the Chaos Emeralds or win 5 of the tokens, you need to win first place, otherwise it will not count. And honestly, for that kind of structure, I don't really mind too much because it does add a bit more replayability to this game. But the problem is that when you actually try to play through this game and get used to controls, is when Sonic R kind of falls apart for some people. Because my lord, the controls in this game are hilariously bad at times. Like fundamentally, the control layout in this game is very simple, as all you can do is just run and jump. But the turning, holy crap, the turning in this game is freaking abysmal. Like in one of the areas, you need to go through this distant island just to get one of the tokens, and when I do so, I had to turn Sonic around so I can get back onto the track, but when I do so, look how freaking slow he goes! Now I will say, when you actually make him run around and such, movement does feel a bit more smoother, I should say. Like they did add a special drift button that allows you to turn a bit more smoothly. But a lot of times, you're mostly running into walls and such. And since this is a Sonic game, there are multiple characters you can play as, and they all do play a bit more differently from one another. And I will give them the credit that partially it does work very well with some of the characters like Tails and Knuckles. As with Tails, he's a bit slower, but he's able to use his trademark flying ability, doubly so with Knuckles as he can glide across the areas, which is very effective with certain of the courses. But then you have the other characters like Metal Sonic, who is basically a lesser Sonic. Tails though, I actually have no idea what this thing does. But I will say, huge props for Traveler's Tales to make literally the most off-putting thing I've ever seen in a Sonic game. Like seriously though, this one freaking character was the inspiration of so many different ghost stories. But it's when we get to Amy and Eggman where things get a lot more egregious. Because unlike the other characters, these two are actually in vehicles, and so because of this, they cannot jump at all. They tried to make up for it for having unique quirks like Amy having a special boost, and Dr. Eggman able to shoot out missiles, but the problem is that their abilities are so weak, it is not really worth it to pick these guys. Especially since this game has a lot of platforming in it, and if you can't jump in a platformer, yeah. But despite all of that, despite all the major issues I've talked about in this video, I surprisingly had a fun time playing through this game. Like, don't get me wrong, objectively speaking, I don't think this is a well-designed game. But I feel like the level design and everything leans so far to the freaking left that it becomes ironically very enjoyable to play. Like, I'm serious, trying to collect all the collectibles in this game and trying to unlock all the characters was surprisingly very fun to do so. As since the items are scattered across the course, it really encourages you to try to explore every nook and cranny. Even if you're constantly going knocking walls and such, I think this game actually breaks me on what is good and what is not. Like, I enjoy the various layouts of the courses throughout this game. There's even special weather mechanics in this game that does affect the course sometimes. Like, water is a big hazard in this game as it constantly slows you down, but if it's snowing, for example, all of the water will turn into ice that you can walk on. And as for the various courses themselves, well, Resort Island is the very first course in this game, and it's basically your very simple grassy plains area. As this area shows a good example on how to explore the areas because there's so many different branching paths that leads to different shortcuts. Although I will say, I feel like they kind of made the shortcuts a bit too easy. Like, most of the CPUs in this game would just go for the regular route, while you could just easily go through this area to cut off a big chunk of the course. Like, at the very least with this shortcut, it's a bit more challenging because you have a lot of trees. But then you have paths that are completely ignoring common sense, like this deserted island that's mostly used just to collect one coin. Like, seriously though, I feel like this game is better as a single player game than just like a multiplayer game. But I feel like the funniest part of this course is easily this loop section. Like, loops are a big thing about the Sonic series, but with this, you can literally just walk around it and it's a lot more faster than going through the loop. And this is why I feel like Radical City is a better execution of the concept that Resort Island tried to do so. Like, you could be on the road and then suddenly take a small little detour and then suddenly you're in a different section of this map. Which is honestly very fun to go through, especially if you're playing as Tails or Knuckles. Regal Ruin is probably the most explorative course of this game because I feel like out of all the levels here, this one really tries to encourage you to explore the areas to find the collectibles. Again, I feel like this game was trying to be a single player platforming racing game first, then a multiplayer game second. Which is especially egregious with the course of Reactive Factory, where out of all the courses, this one felt the most jumbled together. Like, at times with some of the courses, they could be a bit aimless and you have no idea where to go, but I feel like with Reactive Factory is probably when it's at its worst because there's so many different dead ends. Honestly, the one course I feel like it's better just to race than just explore the areas. And then finally, to end things off, we have Radiant Emerald. And honestly, a very solid course to end things off for this game, because it's basically this game's equivalent of Rainbow Road. But the main difference between this and Mario Kart 64 is that this is basically one big freaking rave party. Which leads to the presentation of this game. For a Sega Saturn title, this game looks surprisingly pretty good for the console. Like, even though, yeah, objectively speaking, it is not really as graphically good compared to, like, games these days. But I honestly feel like the aesthetic alone kind of carries this game for me. One of the big things I really like about early 3D Sega games is that they have like this very colorful appeal to them. And as for the soundtrack, well, since this is Sonic the Hedgehog, of course the soundtrack in this game is a real bop, and honestly, out of any kind of Sonic game out there, this has some of the catchiest songs in the series, as it feels like you're going through a big old rave party. I know there is some discussion about the soundtrack being a bit out of place for a racing game, but honestly I don't really mind it too much because, hey, good songs are good songs. Plus, I feel like it enhances the weird experience of Sonic R. Like, I'm telling you, the best way to describe Sonic R playing through it is like one big old fever dream. But anyway, to wrap things up, I think I'm just going to talk about the extra things you can do in this game. For one, as I said earlier in this game, there are the various tokens you can collect to unlock more characters, but also there's the aforementioned Chaos Emeralds. As once you're able to collect all the 7 Chaos Emeralds in each of the course, you're able to unlock Supersonic. And woo! This guy is freaking broken. Like, seriously though, he has the best speed, best turning, and best everything. Like, he is outlandishly broken. And if you play as the various unlockable characters, you have to go and compete against him. And then finally we have Time Trial Mode, which honestly gives you a good amount of options to choose from. Like, there's an option where you can race through the entire course backwards, which weirdly reminds me of those weird Mario Kart videos you would see. And then there's stuff like Balloon Hunt, which has you exploring the entire course to find 5 balloons. And then this cool tag team thing, where you need to chase down all the computers and tag them, and once you do so, you win. Surprisingly, a very good amount of game modes you can choose from in this game. And yeah, I think that will be it for Sonic R. And final verdict, yeah, I had pretty fun with it. It's not gonna be like the most mind-blowing racing game you ever played, but for what it is, I thought it was like a cute little racing game. I'll be honest, when I first tried to play through this game, I thought I would honestly kind of hate this game, but I came out kind of pleasantly surprised. Objectively speaking, I don't really think it's like a good game. It's honestly middle of the road. But despite that, there's just something very charming about Sonic R. Like, this game is freaking weird, and I think I love it because of it. If you're curious in this game, then I also recommend trying it out. Don't expect this to be like a 10 out of 10 greatest racing game of all time period, because it's just a decently fun, harmless Sonic title. But as for the next video, I'm still in a bit of a Mario Kart racing mood, so I thought why not to do one more ranking video for now. And so, for the next time we'll be here, we'll be going through all the tracks in Mario Kart DS. But that'll do for today, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!